Hey guys, thanks for joining me here on Replica Rants. This video is the culmination of two issues that I faced this month. The first was my need for a birthday gift for my sister, and a surprising issue in the history community that I wasn't aware of until recently. The backstory is that I was looking for new video ideas, so I started stalking some different forums, seeing what the reenacting and historical enthusiast community needed or wanted, and one thing that came up a couple of times was someone saying something along the lines of, hey, help, I live in a country like, I don't know, Australia, or maybe a location in the United States, where it's really hard or expensive or illegal to get firearms for reenacting or just out of an interest in history. Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys know this, but I have a bit of a passion for historical firearms and weapons, so this problem sounded right up my alley. Living in the US, this particular problem isn't that big of an issue for me, except, of course, for some of the more rare / expensive / exotic weapons, but I can see why it would be a bigger issue in places with stricter gun laws. So I put my mind to work on what I could do to try and solve this. Then it hit me. Lots of people can't buy real guns, but no matter where you live, you can probably buy a toy gun. What if we took something that everyone could get and made it into a weapon? A little paint ought to do the trick, so in this video I will recount to you my process, what I learned, etc. Oh, and before we continue, you might have noticed that this isn't your normal Replica Rants video format. The reason is that this project is also going to double as a birthday gift for my sister, who is also the person who usually does the camera work for my videos. So throughout the process I did take a lot of pictures though, so hopefully this is still helpful. Anyway, the first thing I want to address before we get started, is this legal? Now, that is a simple question with a complicated answer. It depends on where you live. Surprise. Toy gun laws vary widely from country to country, state to state, and even county to county within the state. I cannot stress this enough. Check your local laws before you do anything. Some areas have no laws, some areas need the entire thing to be blaze orange, some areas need a certain portion to be transparent. The last thing you or I want is to get arrested for accidentally creating or possessing an illegal item. I can't address laws for every location, but I'll give a general overview of the federal laws here in the US. The main law that we need to be concerned about, no matter what state you live in, is Title 15 of the United States Code, Section 5001, which states that, quote, it shall be unlawful for any person to manufacture, enter into commerce, ship, transport, or receive any toy, look-alike, or imitation firearm unless such firearm contains or has affixed to it a marking approved by the Secretary of Commerce, unquote. Now, all this is just a measure to make sure that manufacturers don't sell toy guns that could be mistaken for the real thing right out of the box. Because you are not the manufacturer of the toy, just an end consumer, your rights to modify a toy to your heart's desire are mostly secure. Just make sure that you don't sell it or ship it through the mail without an orange tip. However, while in general it is fine to remove an orange tip and color a toy gun however you please, you still need to check your local laws before this can be done. Why is this? It's because things can change. For example, New York and maybe Chicago? I don't remember. Anyway, New York, they've banned all toy guns that are black or blue. Bottom line is this. When in doubt, just call your local law enforcement office and discuss it with them. I'm sure they'll be happy to help. However, even if this is legal, there's another issue. Is this a good idea? Again, it all depends on where you live and how you plan to use this. If you live in an urban area and plan to give this to your small kid who doesn't know healthy methods of conflict resolution, don't. If you want to use it only in a reenactment or something, by all means, go ahead. Before starting, sit down with yourself and really think about the risk-reward ratio you might encounter in the possession of something like this. In general, when in doubt, don't do it. After much consideration, I have decided that this is a legal and reasonably safe project for my particular situation. My reasons why. 1. There are no federal, state, or local laws that would prohibit this project. 2. Basically all use of this item is going to be on private property, not somewhere like a public park that would raise a concern from observers. 3. Even if I were to use this item within the side of a road where someone might see it, it is unlikely that anyone will because I live in a very rural area with only a few neighbors and very light traffic. 4. If worst came to worst and somehow a police officer made their way to where we were and saw my sister fooling around with this thing, my sister is old enough that she knows how to act in a situation like that. Please, please, please weigh the costs and benefits of this project before doing it. Remember that most people don't like to see realistic guns in public, and police officers are trained to treat anything that looks remotely like a weapon as one. Just here in the US, hundreds of people are arrested or killed each year because of toy guns. Please be responsible and use good judgment. Well, if you're still watching it at this point, congratulations, I guess. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get on with the show. For this project, you're going to need a few supplies. First, of course, you'll need a toy gun. The techniques I'll be using should work with almost any plastic toy, so the choice is yours about what you want to use. For me, I chose this 1911 style toy gun from China. There are a few reasons why. It's pretty cheap, it has the same size and shape as a real 1911, it is a 1911, so it will be useful for anyone reenacting an American soldier from, well, basically 1911 to the present, and it can be found on almost any ordering site there is. I originally found it on Alibaba, but I ordered it off of eBay and I saw some listings on Amazon as well. There are dozens of sellers marketing this particular model, but it shouldn't matter, they all come from the same factory. Just search up something along the lines of soft bullet toy gun 1911 1-to-1 scale with ejecting magazine, and it should pop up. The link for my particular seller will be in the description. Because I had never done something like this before, I bought 2 of them so I could build them side by side. That way if I messed up on one, I had spare parts, and at the end I could take all the best parts and put them together in the gun for my sister. I also ordered 50 extra bullets because, well, why not? They're super cheap. In addition to a toy, you'll need some other supplies. Black matte spray paint, black matte acrylic paint, 220 grit sandpaper. A Dremel tool also helps, but it's not required, you can get by without it. Screwdriver, the size I used is on the screen if you can see that. Oh, a paintbrush. I only used one throughout the entire course of this project, and again, it's on the screen. And then you're also going to need a cardboard sheet or some sort of drop cloth for painting. What else? Oh yeah, and if you want to do some weathering, you're also going to need Rub and Buff, silver, burnt sienna acrylic paint, and burnt umber acrylic paint. I started off by opening up the box and taking out the toy. The listing showed a colorful yellow gun, but I ended up getting the marine blue edition. Now this doesn't matter to me, but heads up if you live somewhere with local laws that would frown on this. Buyer beware. Next step, disassembly. Over the course of this project, I took these things apart so many times that if you handed me one right now, I could probably completely disassemble it and put it back together again without any reference material. Now I think I'd be a great factory worker for making these. I don't think I'd enjoy it too much though. A couple of pro tips. Photograph every stage so you know how everything fits, and if you're OCD like me, you can draw a diagram like I did so you can keep track of each internal part. Oh, and by the way, you don't need to keep track of the screw order like I did, that was useless. They're all the exact same size except for the one holding the sear in, which has a little tiny flange on it. The parts I decided to paint were the body halves, the side halves, barrels, and magazine halves. I like the pearl-handled look of the white grips, so I opted not to paint those. Before painting, I removed all the shiny surfaces on the guns using 220 grit sandpaper and knocked down the obnoxious logo on the side with the Dremel tool. I accidentally went a little deep, but it's a bit hard to tell on the final product. Then I painted them. I didn't bother with priming, mostly because I didn't have any primer, and I didn't want to go to the store, and why bother on a project like this? I mean, the paint bonds to plastic anyway. I did a few coats over the course of a couple days, being mindful to get the parts that you might not think about when painting irregular objects like this. These included the inside of the barrel tip to give it some extra shadow, the little part that the slide exposes when it comes back, and the inside of the magazine well. It would be a shame to have your experience ruined by a spot that you missed. I tried to keep the paint out of the areas where there would be moving parts too, because I didn't want to gum up the mechanism too much. For the trigger and the magazine release, I used acrylic, because they'd be too awkward to spray without getting paint on the moving bits. Oh, one thing to remember, when painting detailed parts like this with acrylic, thin your paints. Water is your friend. Thin them down and just do a bunch of coats. It'll help preserve the details and it will be a lot less thick than unthinned paint. I was basically painting with black water. This takes patience, but you'll not regret it. I was too lazy to thin my paints on a later part of the project, as you'll find out, and I sorely regretted it. I didn't bother to read the directions on the spray can until after I finished painting, so it was only then that I discovered that it takes 5 to 7 days for the paint to bond to plastic. Fine. Well, in the meantime, I decided to try and paint some of the colorful cartridges to look more realistic. I decided to try it with acrylic paint, which was a massive mistake. The first batch, I didn't thin my paints at all, and they turned out awful. Spots and divots, thick blotches, and they ended up being too thick to even load into the magazine. The second time around, I did a bit of a better job, and I was actually pretty pleased with how they turned out. It was not worth the effort though, because to get them like that I had to thin out the paint until it was basically water and then apply coat after coat after coat. I lost count of how many coats I did, but if any of you want to do this, don't do it this way. If I were to do this again, just get some gold or brass spray paint, cover the entire cartridge, and then paint the bullet and the primer with acrylic. Now, to be fair, I was actually quite satisfied with the bullet and the primer paint, so the link to the paint set I used for the cartridges will be in the description. I was able to control my impulse until day 6 of the drying process, when I took the pieces and snapped together a shell to see how it would look. And I liked it. It looked good. Then, surprise, I messed up painting again. But unlike the bad mistakes with cartridges, this was more like a Bob Ross happy accident result. It began when I decided to touch up some spots of the gun with acrylic paint. But as soon as I put some on, it became apparent that the acrylic paint was much duller than the spray paint, which, even though it was labeled as matte, still had some gloss due to its nature as an aerosol. Oh well, I said, in for a penny, in for a pound. And so I painted the whole slide with acrylic, using what I learned from painting the trigger and mag release, thinning the paint to the extreme, doing lots of coats. And you know what? I actually like the finish much more than the spray paint. It might be confirmation bias, but I actually think it's better. The spray stuff still looks kind of plasticky, while the acrylic lends more of a flat finish that looks more like the blued finish on real firearms. Now these are starting to look really good. Now, if you want a pristine specimen, skip this section, because beyond this point is mostly weathering. Adam Savage did a project similar to this a while ago and made a video about it, link in the description, and this is where I got a lot of tips for my weathering. This is where the rub and buff comes in. Adam recommends this because, in comparison to just using silver paint, it can give a more realistic illusion of a metal surface. All you have to do is, in the name, rub it onto a surface, then buff it until it looks like metal. Shocker. So I took a rag with my finger in it and got to work. When weathering something like this, it's good to think about the spots that will get the most wear. Ask yourself how this item would be used. What spots rub up against a holster? Which places are touched more than others? What parts would be exposed to friction? Some spots I focused on included the end of the barrel, the front of the slide, the front and rear sight blades, the edges of the slide, the ribs on the slide, the hammer, the trigger guard, the edge of the frame, etc. If there's one tip that you take away from this, it is that symmetry does not often occur in nature. Be sporadic. Be uneven. For example, I made one edge of the slide mount more worn than the other. Also, quick PSA, a little bit of rub and buff goes a long way. I put a pretty small dollop on the cardboard in anticipation, and I barely used any of it. This was another time that I was glad I had a spare gun to practice on and experiment with. It turned out alright for me, but I feel like I could have done better. I bet if I did this a couple more times, I'd have it down. This was starting to look really good. I put it back together using the parts diagram from earlier so it could actually function. Now I wanted to add just a bit of dirt and rust as a finishing touch. For this bit, I used a mix of burnt sienna and burnt umber acrylic paint, very much watered down. It was pretty simple. Add sienna for more rust, add umber for more dirt, and thin. I just used my trusty paintbrush to apply it. And that's it. The gun was finished. But I needed a good way to gift it. So I bought a pick and pluck pistol case from Cedar Mill Fine Firearms. Link for that in the description. Okay, this was probably a bit overkill, but it was cheap and on sale, and I mean, come on, it looks great. So after all the trials, torment, and everything else, my sister's 1911 was done. Now for the cost. I don't know exactly how much this cost me, to be honest with you, and it'll be different for everyone depending on what supplies you already have. I had to buy most of my materials to start, so it was a bit more for me. If I were to guess, I would estimate $60, give or take, if you buy 2 guns and don't buy the case. So anyway, I hope that this was useful to someone out there. My dearest sister, if you're watching this video, it means that I've already given this to you. You earned it. Thank you for everything you do for the channel, and happy birthday. To everyone else, check the description for product links, helpful documents, and more. Thank you for watching. See you next month. Out.